Chapter 9:32. Ifishio Island. This colonial satellite located at Side 2 had been standing in the so-called neutral position since the Geon Principality started the war against the Earth Federation. It watched the war coldly from the sidelines. However, neutrality was never a talisman to avoid war. As the Earth Federation retreated in the universe, Geon, who took advantage of the situation, became more and more rampant and arrogant. Under this situation, the originally neutral colonial satellites also faced a difficult and terrible situation. Coercion, temptation. They constantly used various means to force them to side with Geon and become the lackeys of the man who was regarded as God by the Geon people. Ifishio Island also welcomed this moment. The Geon fleet, which came with Killian Dobby's surrender order, surrounded Side 2 without any explanation. Ifishio Island, which resisted Geon's tyranny the most, was the most aggressive. For this reason, there were even more Geon fleets surrounding Ifishio Island. Two flashes of light swept past the Geon warship, the Misty-class cruiser. After sliding in an arc trajectory in the void, they flew toward Ifishio Island. Major. The noise from Ifishio Island seems to be still very loud. Anyway, there's still some time. Let those people shout a few more times. The ridicule from his subordinates made Seema Callahau smile and didn't pay much attention to it. Now that Geon was constantly winning and the Earth Federation was losing, it was only a matter of time before the other colonial satellites surrendered. In order to make Ifishio Island surrender as soon as possible, Seema's subordinates were carrying out the preliminary arrangements of soft suppression step by step. The moment all the arrangements were completed, the noise from Ifishio Island would naturally be much lower. Oh, right. Did you find out the cause of the radio interference just now? Also, did you get in touch with Lieutenant General Desru? Seema Callahau was very concerned about the radio interference encountered when the fleet first arrived at Side 2. Although many people thought it was a trick by Side 2 at that time, it turned out that Side 2, whose defense was so weak, couldn't even withstand a single blow, had such means. Not to mention, there was no means to make a Geon fleet lose contact with its commander-in-chief. We haven't gotten in touch with Commander-in-Chief Desru yet. The technical department is already analyzing the cause. I believe there will be a result soon. The subordinate answered Seema's question confidently. With the successful introduction of the first MS Zagu in human history, many Geon people had already established the belief that Geon technology was the best in the world. Although Seema had some doubts about this, she still followed them. All right, then let's move on to the next step of the plan. This is the final step. Yes, Major. However, just as Seema led her troops to land on the outer walls of Ifishio Island, a sudden change occurred. An invisible storm erupted from the depths of the void in an instant, sweeping across with unstoppable might. The MS, warships, and even colonial satellites, which were built by humans with cutting-edge technology, crashed on spot. What happened? Everyone, activate the backup power source immediately. Seema was shocked. She quickly activated the backup energy source and called out to her subordinates through the communication channel. What made her happy was that at the original position of Geon's fleet, a little bit of light lit up again. This was a sign that the battleship had restarted its backup energy source. However, MS was not so lucky. After all, not everyone could calmly deal with the accident that happened in front of them like Seema Callahau. Major, I'm fine. It's just that the backup energy source was activated a little late. Also, it seems that I need to return to the mothership once. After Seema's repeated calls, her subordinates finally responded. However, their situation was not optimistic. Moreover, Seema's own situation was the same. Forget it. It seems that the serious situation will return first. The others will return according to the order of attack. Yes, Major. Under Seema's command, the chaotic scene gradually calmed down. However, the doubts in Seema's heart became more and more obvious and lingered. At this time, Seema inadvertently saw the interior of the colonial satellite from the glass below. There it was pitch black. However, there was a bit of light jumping. There was the light of a flashlight. There was the light of a candle. However, without exception, they all scattered in all directions. It was not difficult to imagine that this was a panicked but orderly evacuation. It seems that the interference this time is a little more serious. Seema seemed to have some certainty about the change just now. Major, there's a situation. Look ahead. The end of Ifiku Island. Suddenly, a voice of fear sounded from the communication channel, causing a burst of exclamations. Squirming skin, pustules that sometimes bulged and sometimes shriveled, terrifying tentacles that were writhing endlessly, monsters that were shoulder to shoulder with Msai. No, there were even some individuals that were longer and much larger than Msai, emerged from the depths of the void and rushed toward Ifiku Island one after another. Oh my God, what the hell is that? Monster? Devil? There are constant sounds of panic and prayers in the communication channel. Seema even saw a few pilots who were operating a small MS jumped out of the cockpit and ran in the direction of the battleship in a panic. Calm down. Everyone calm down. No matter what it is, their goal is probably side 2, which is Ifiku Island. Seema's stern voice calmed most of them down. However, after hearing Seema's words, some people were still shaken. Major, in that case, can we retreat? Shut up. Those ugly monsters are not humans, and the colonial satellite under our feet is filled with humans. Our kind. What about us? Can we retreat? Seema didn't know what the purpose of those monsters was, but looking at their aggressive manner, they were probably not good people. In other words, if the Zeon troops led by Seema retreated here, the colonial satellite under their feet, and even the entire Side 2 colonial satellite group, would become a paradise for these monsters and a hell for humans to be slaughtered. But Major, the people of Ifiku Island, no need to say more. Even if Lieutenant General Desru was here, he would do the same. Now, it's not a civil war between humans, but a war between humans and monsters of unknown origin. Seema firmly and decisively suppressed the doubts of his subordinates. Everyone, Zagu who can still move, come with me. Almsai quickly get into shooting position and annihilate the enemy, with Ifiku Island as the center. In addition, send someone to inform all colonial satellites to evacuate. Yes, Major. The Zeon fleet that surrounded Ifiku Island quickly moved. They left the position where they besieged Ifiku Island and faced the incoming enemy. They moved the turret and locked onto the enemy under the command of the bridge. Main cannon, fire. Then, with the roar of the Msai captains, a torrent of particles rushed out of the barrel of the Msai-class cruiser in the blink of an eye, crossed the void, and directly penetrated the ferocious and huge monsters. The moment the ugly monsters on the screen were pierced by the particle beam, cheers came from the entire communication channel. The ferocious appearance of the monsters that looked extremely terrifying being blasted apart by a cannon stabilized the morale of the Zeon soldiers, who were frightened by it and gradually recovered. No matter how terrifying the enemy was, as long as they could be blasted apart by a cannon, there was no need to be afraid. Almsai troops disperse. Pay attention to the enemy's attack methods. We can't rule out the possibility that the enemy has long-range attacks, such as beam attacks. The Msai battleships in the rear became braver as they fought, and Seema couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief. From the invaders who were forced to take sides to the Guardians fighting to protect Ifiku Island, this change made Seema feel pressured, but she also couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief. As the distance closed, the Msai assault force led by Seema could more clearly see the ferocious appearance of the monsters that suddenly appeared in this universe. What a bunch of ugly monsters! The mocking laughter of her subordinates came from the communication channel. Focus! Don't be alone. There are a lot of these monsters. Seema bit her lip and ordered loudly. Even with the long-range firepower support from Sai, the number of monsters in front of her did not decrease. What the hell is going on? All of a sudden, a terrifying killing intent pierced Seema's mind. Instinctively, Seema controlled the landline to rise. Under the rapidly rising pressure, Seema clearly felt that her Zagu eye encountered a strong jolt. Taking a closer look, Zaguai's right leg was damaged at some point. She clearly didn't see any attack from the enemy just now. No, the killing intent just now wasn't fake. Otherwise, Seema's instinct wouldn't have seized control of her body in one fell swoop, allowing her to escape from danger. Boom! A dazzling fireball bloomed with the radiance of death not far from Seema. It was Seema's subordinates. Everyone, spread out, spread out. Use the fastest speed to avoid the enemy's shooting range. Although she couldn't see where the enemy's attack came from, Seema immediately suspected that the enemy had a high-energy weapon that they didn't know about. Therefore, she immediately notified her subordinates and took the lead to rush below the monsters, so as to get closer to the enemy and observe them. Sure enough, when she got close to a certain distance, Seema captured a strange scene. Every time a Zagu appeared in the line of sight of these monsters, the large and small eyeballs distributed on the heads of the monsters would instantly move and gather all their gazes on the Zagu. Could it be that these eyeballs are playing tricks? She thought of it and did it. Seema, who discovered such a strange scene, made a prompt decision and immediately took action to verify her thoughts. However, these monsters that were as big as Misty weren't alone. Besides the monsters of the same size beside it, there were also smaller monsters that were about the same size as Zagu that rushed out of their bodies and pounced on the Zagu that Seema was piloting. Chapter 9:33. When the light from the battle penetrated the glass dome of Ifiko Island, a figure also set foot on the colonial satellite shrouded in endless darkness. Didn't I say that the control system here is useless? What are you doing here? White Cat State Zero lay on Ray Minkai's shoulder, looked around, and shook its little head. There are some things that need to be confirmed. Although he had expected it, Ray Minkai still felt that he had to personally confirm the situation here. For example, the horrifying event that might have happened that would cause great changes in the lives of most people. Fortunately, but at the same time, unfortunately, the beta appeared at this time. Perhaps this was an opportunity to save the people of this colonial satellite. Well, it's just that the situation of those people is not very good. White Cat State Zero nodded pretentiously and raised its head to look at the dark void outside. But at this moment, the flames of war were spreading. Indeed, the situation of the John fleet, which was resisting the beta attack, was not very good. In the face of a large disparity in numbers and an unknown enemy, even the John fleet, which made the colonial satellite tremble in fear, could only grit their teeth and resist the beta attack. However, before Ray Minkai attacked, he still had some things to deal with. State Zero, you should know what to do. Well, leave it to me. To be honest, I was really shocked. I didn't expect those guys to be so crazy. Hurry up and get rid of them. The John fleet can't hold on for long. Okay, right away. White Cat State Zero jumped down from Ray Minkai's shoulder and quickly disappeared into the darkness. A few of the beta had broken through the John fleet's defense network and landed directly on the outer wall of Ifiko Island. These monsters that only knew how to kill would not invade Ifiko Island along the passage as humans thought. Instead, they used extremely violent methods to destroy the outer wall of the colonial satellite, so as to achieve the most direct and fastest efficiency to invade the interior of the colonial satellite. At that time, the humans hiding in the refuge facilities would be wantonly slaughtered by these beta. You have to finish what you started. The White Cat, State Zero, went to deal with the mess that John's fleet had created on the outer wall of Ifaisu Island, while Ray Minkai went to deal with the fish that John's fleet had missed. Young man over there, wait a minute. Just as Ray Minkai was about to call out Lancelot, King's Sword, a voice full of energy came from not far away. At the same time, a strong beam of light illuminated Ray Minkai's figure. Ray Minkai narrowed his eyes slightly. His muscles tensed up, and a huge force was released. Who? I'm the captain of the militia, Jeros. Everyone had entered the shelter. Why are you still loitering outside? Aren't you afraid that those damn G1 lunatics will capture you? It turned out that the person who had come was the old captain, Jeros, who was afraid that someone had not entered the shelter yet and ran out alone to patrol around. looking at the old man's posture that if he did not follow him, he would forcefully pull him into the shelter. Ray Minkai did not know whether to laugh or cry for a moment. But after all, the other party had good intentions. After some persuasion, the dignified prince of the Britannia Empire, Ray Minkai, was defeated by this stubborn old man in the end. "Sorry, Mr. Jaros, I still have things to deal with. Why don't you go back to the shelter first? The enemy is coming." "What? Young man, it's not wrong to have guts, but you're just flesh and blood. How can you fight against those messes driven by those lunatics?" Jaros glared, and suddenly his momentum rose. He pointed at Ray Minkai's nose and taught him a lesson. He could not wait to personally make Ray Minkai see the difference between steel and flesh and blood. Boom! At this moment, a huge explosion came from above his head. Amidst the rumbling, there seemed to be the sound of intense wind descending rapidly. It wasn't until the sound of a heavy object fiercely smashing onto the ground and the strange, pungent gust of wind that Jaros, who was trying to take Ray Minkai away from the shelter with the attitude of an elder, was shaken to the ground. He looked at the direction of the sand, the gust of wind, and the pungent gust of wind with a solemn expression. Heavy footsteps, the whistling of the wind, and the rustling sound that made one's scalp tingle were all telling Jaros everything that happened in front of him might have exceeded his life experience, and it was also subverting his worldview. "Old man, step back. Leave this to me. I'll return the flashlight to you." Jaros, who was still in shock, tightened his grip, and the flashlight that had fallen to the ground in the impact just now returned to his hand. "You young man, what are you talking about? No matter what, I'm still the captain of the militia here. If you want to go, you go first." Jaros took a deep breath, gritted his teeth, and stood up, wanting to pull Ray Minkai back behind him. However, in the darkness, a terrifying, ugly, and distorted monster body that challenged Jaros' outlook on life appeared in the area illuminated by the flashlight, baring its fangs and brandishing its claws at Jaros. What kind of monster is that? Young man, you go first. I'll take the rear." Although Jaros' hands were trembling, he still tried to let Ray Minkai go first. Ray Minkai shook his head and still stood firmly in front of Jaros, facing the monster that was attracted by the light of the flashlight. Beta. Buzz. A low buzzing sound came from the air. That was not the sound of a monster, nor was it the sound of a human. Amidst this sound, Ray Minkai's calm voice slowly sounded. "I can be considered an expert in dealing with these monsters." The sound of the wind rose again. However, the sound of the wind did not come from the beta that had descended from the sky, but from behind Ray Minkai and Jaros. Buzz, buzz. A fleeting light appeared and disappeared, a pungent, burnt smell. It immediately activated Jaros' past memories. Light beam attack. The hot wind that swept over, the tremors that shook the soul, were all telling Jaros, in this dark space there were still things hidden that he did not know. "MS, you're from John's fleet." Jaros stretched out his trembling finger and pointed at Ray Minkai. In this colonial satellite, the only person who could use that kind of weapon was probably John's MS. Ray Minkai shook his head and sighed. If John's group could realize the beam weapon used by MS at this time, I'm afraid they would have already beaten the Earth Federation away. In front of him was the tank-level, soldier-level beta that had descended from the sky with ferocious flames, attempting to create a massacre on this colonial satellite, but were pierced by beams of light that came out of nowhere. Ray Minkai raised his right hand and pointed at the beta that was still falling from the core pillar of the colonial satellite. "Fly, my family. Slaughter all the betas who have invaded this colonial satellite." As soon as Ray Minkai's voice fell, a dizzying noise came to Jaros' ears. What's that sound?" Jaros, who had finally recovered from the dizzying noise, saw an astonishing scene. A series of agile, fast, and mysterious objects that constantly flashed in the darkness were centered on those monsters. Like a pack of wolves that surrounded and hunted, they wantonly tore holes in the monsters, pierced through the targets, and tore them apart. However, in less than a few minutes, The beta that had fallen to the ground had been slaughtered by the mysterious objects that were so agile that they did not seem to be dead. Okay, now, old man, you can leave the shelter. Leave the rest of the monsters to me. Rei Minkai's gaze moved up and looked at the hole in the pillar. The invading beta had probably spread around this colonial satellite from there, right? If this continues, the humans in the fallout shelter will be doomed. Wait, are you going to fight those monsters like this? No. Rei Minkai raised his eyebrows and pointed behind Jaros. How is that possible? My partner is standing right behind you. Hearing this, Jaros turned around to look. Amidst the flickering light of the distant explosion, a tall steel giant clad in platinum-colored armor stood there, looking exceptionally mighty. MMS. In Jaros's bewildered eyes, a pair of bright and beautiful light wings stretched out behind the steel giant. It flapped its wings and soared high. At the same time, White Cat State Zero, who was dealing with the arrangements left by the John fleet on Ephesu Island, frowned slightly. This feeling? Something's not right. While in doubt, White Cat State Zero subconsciously raised its sharp claws and smashed a hole in the huge steel can that was 30 meters tall and at least 10 meters in diameter in front of Gouda. Poof. The moment the steel can was broken, a colorless and odorless gas gushed out and blew the unprepared White Cat State Zero away. After twisting in space for a while, White Cat State Zero landed steadily on the outer wall of Ephesu Island. Ba. What the hell is this? Fortunately, my body is a metal life form. State White Cat Zero cursed as it looked around. After discovering that all the steel cans around it had been broken, it finally found the nearest damaged steel can and smashed it. Only then did it vent its anger a little. State Zero, are you done on your side? Before White Cat State Zero had time to find Rei Minkai to claim credit, Rei Minkai came to find it himself. White Cat State Zero, who was lying on the broken copper and iron, raised its head lazily and waved in the direction of Lancelot, King's sword. Done. Then, I'll leave the beta invading the outer wall to you. I'll go support the John fleet. How about it? White Cat State Zero licked its lips and rolled its eyes. What else? Don't tell me you want your Lancelot to run into those narrow passages. Forget it. Consider it my bad luck. White Cat State Zero muttered a few times, turned into a stream of light, and turned back along the passage it came from. Damn beta, I'm here to settle accounts with you. Chapter 9:34. The battle between the John fleet brought by Sema and the beta was still ongoing. Sema's discovery had indeed raised the vigilance of the Zaga pilots. However, as Zaga dodged and gradually advanced, the individuals that were comparable to the Msai cruiser at the back also discovered Msai's existence. In fact, it was very difficult not to discover them. After all, every round of Msai salvo was bound to be able to tear a hole in the beta's formation. It was difficult to not be discovered by the enemy. Therefore, under Sema's gaze, the eyes of the figures that were chasing Zaga rolled for a while and stared at the Msai cruiser that was bombarding them from behind. Not good. Msai, retreat immediately. Sema's reaction was fast. However, she was still one step too slow. Countless flashes of light were fleeting. Several dazzling flashes of light burst out from Msai's position. It was the flash of light from Msai's explosion. In just a moment, we lost 3 Msai. Sema looked at the last flash of light from the 3 Msai in disbelief. Sema once again recognized the horror of the enemy. If these monsters were allowed to continue attacking Msai, Sema and the others would inevitably be destroyed along with Msai, and they would end up being drowned by these monsters. The only strategy that could allow these Msai to move without being affected by those monsters to the greatest extent was the strategy that the Zagu pilots could achieve. A strategy that was equivalent to courting death. Sema gritted her teeth, and a trace of struggle flashed in her eyes. In the end, she ordered, "Everyone, pull up and do your best to attract the enemy's attention. Cooperate with Msai's long-range firepower attack and annihilate all these damn monsters." Yes, to Sema's surprise, this order that was undoubtedly courting death did not receive any objections from her subordinates. and there was not even a voice of doubt. There were only more and more dazzling propulsion lights that led the surrounding Zagu to converge into the team that attracted the attention of those monsters. The moment the Miz team, led by Seema, left the blind spot of the large beta individuals, they were faced with a terrifying situation where countless small and medium-sized beta individuals pounced on them. Looking at the dense, twisting, and extremely ugly monsters swarming towards them, the Zaga mech pilots at the front could not help but suck in a breath of cold air. Shocked and frightened, they subconsciously cursed out loud. These at hashtag yen% monsters die. The flames from the muzzle of the 105mm machine gun were like the anger in the hearts of the Zaga pilots. They desperately tore the monsters in front of them into pieces until they broke through the small and medium-sized beta and appeared in front of the large individuals. Even though the rolling eyeballs in front of him were frightening, the red-eyed mech pilot Zagu was no longer afraid. There was only the fury of killing all the monsters in front of him. Die! The steel giants that were dyed red with flesh and blood either raised their guns, drew the giant axes at their waists, or simply turned the shields on their shoulders and crashed into the heads of the large individuals in the most barbaric manner. If they could hear anything now, it would probably be the terrifying sounds of bodies being torn apart by machine guns, torn apart by giant axes, and broken by shoulder shields. However, to Zagu, who was already in a killing frenzy, this might be a pity. This was because, filled with rage, what they wanted the most was the death of these monsters that had come out of nowhere with monstrous killing intent. The large individuals that were targeted rolled, twisted, and struggled to survive among the Zagu that surrounded them. However, this accelerated their footsteps toward death. After a bloody battle, several large monsters were buried. However, Seema did not feel happy at all. This was because, in the attack just now, 3 Zagu were stopped by the densely packed small and medium-sized individuals and were left there forever. Everyone retreat. The attack was completed. Seema did not want to stay in the middle of the monster pile any longer. The only thing she needed to do was to continue attracting the attention of the monsters. Let Msai, who was at the back, once again throw in firepower to suppress them. However, the densely packed small and medium-sized beta suddenly paused and then separated to the sides at an extremely fast speed. Quick! Retreat! Seema's eyes were about to pop out of their sockets. She used all her strength to shout for her subordinates to retreat quickly. This scene made Seema once again taste the regret of Msai being sunk by these monsters. The price was that half of the MS troops that she led were lost on the spot. Seeing her subordinates being annihilated in the dazzling light without even having the time to respond, the anger in Seema's heart had already burned through her entire body. All of her rationality almost disappeared from her body. All that was left was the anger of wanting to take revenge on her subordinates who trusted her and followed her. Major, come back. It's very dangerous there. Fortunately, among the surviving subordinates, there were more rational people. 2 Zagu appeared on both sides of the Zagu that Seema was piloting. They used their strength to control Seema's Zagu and forced her and her Zagu to once again rush into the blind spot of the large beta. Seema did not say anything to stop them, nor did she scold her subordinates for acting without permission. This was because the moment they retreated, the Msai's suppressive fire finally arrived. Seeing the monsters being annihilated by the Msai's second round of fire, the anger in Seema's heart finally subsided a little. Seema, whose rationality once again took control of her body, slowly exhaled. I'm fine now. Agunil, thank you. Her subordinates smiled and did not pay much attention to it. They were also extremely angry, but Seema could not let anything happen to her here. These monsters have intelligence. We underestimated them. Recalling the 3 Msai's and the subsequent destruction of half of the Msai's troops, Seema had to admit this fact. Their side had paid such a heavy price, but what they got in return was not the light of victory in this battle. Instead, it was extremely thrilling with a slim chance of survival. It was very likely that they would die without a doubt. Moreover, Seema and the others had no other choice. After the size round of firepower, when those monsters soared into the air again, it would be the moment of life and death. Either Seema and the others would die, or these monsters would die. There was no other choice. The moment the fatal beam from the Messiah became thin, Seema's voice resounded through the communication channel. For humanity, and for ourselves, charge with me. Before she finished speaking, the Zagu that Seema was piloting took the lead and rushed towards the large individual that had destroyed half of the Messiah's troops. At this moment, they were unafraid of death. Only in this way, they who regarded themselves as dead people had a chance to fight for a chance of survival in this certain death battle. However, the moment Seema piloted the Zagu and was about to enter the shooting range, the monster that she had locked onto suddenly struggled and rolled. Its movements were so intense that it even smashed the small and medium-sized monsters that were hovering around it into a bloody mist. What's going on? Seema was shocked and decisively gave the order. Everyone, change direction. Change target. What followed was an even stranger scene. The moment Seema led her subordinates to change their target, the surrounding monsters strangely boiled. Something seemed to have happened to the densely packed monsters that made one's scalp tingle. Sometimes it spread outwards. Sometimes it moved towards the center. The only thing that could be seen was that the large individual in the center seemed to be gradually dying. What were those monsters hiding from? Seema's eyes flashed, and she said with some surprise, opportunities that could not be missed would not come again. No matter what happened in the center of the monster pile, for people like them who were already certain of death, it was a glimmer of hope. Everyone, prioritize attacking the large individual. Attack. Do we catch the opportunity? The protagonist who made such a big movement in the center of the monster pile was Mecha. Once again relying on the dimensional barrier system of Lancelot, Sword of the King, Mecha, who wantonly attacked the Beta Space Fleet, sent two armed composite wings to the left and right of the Zago army from the beginning to monitor their movements. The behavior of this Zago army was indeed beyond Mecha's expectations. In the face of an unknown and terrifying enemy, they could still fight to the death without retreating. After all, this was the Gion fleet that almost buried everyone on Ephesu Island. Such a huge difference made Mecha shake his head involuntarily. In the face of an alien enemy, the people who were preparing to slaughter their compatriots a moment ago were actually willing to sacrifice themselves to resist the alien enemy, although they did not know what was in the iron cans installed on the outer wall of Ephesu Island. Lancelot, Sword of the King, constantly moved back and forth in the Beta fleet, using the dimensional barrier to the maximum efficiency to wipe out all the large individuals with laser attack capabilities. Lancelot, Sword, who had completely unfolded the dimensional barrier, was fearless. It galloped among the Beta fleet without any hindrance until it brushed past the small and medium-sized Beta fleet on the periphery and most of Zaga's troops. That's MS. How is that possible? The Federation's MS. The moment she saw Lancelot, Sword of the King, Seema subconsciously thought of the Earth Federation. But after seeing the pair of gorgeous light wings behind Lancelot, Sword of the King, Seema was certain that the unknown body that brushed past her was not a product of the Earth Federation. But the only credible reason that caused the commotion of those monsters was this unknown body. Major, look, what's going on? The exclamations of her subordinates continued, causing Seema to switch the screen of the rear monitor. In the next second, a large beta appeared on the screen. The moment Lancelot, King's sword collided with it, a hole appeared in its body. And this cave happened to be where Lancelot, Sword of the King, had passed through, and it was also the location that caused the death of this large beta. Chapter 9:35. From a situation of certain death to the only way out, Seema and the others could be said to have experienced a trip to the gates of hell. The seemingly endless sea of monsters finally ushered in the end of destruction. What made Seema feel ridiculous was that they were not the ones who ended this group of terrifying monsters. Instead, it was a strange body of unknown identity that had yet to contact them. Clean up the battlefield. Castle, report the casualties. Looking at the monster corpses that had already lost all signs of life and turned a large area into a terrifying space with countless pieces of flesh floating in the air, Seema slowly closed her eyes and gave an order that she did not want to, but had to immediately carry out the inventory. Yes, Major. Castle was Seema's deputy, a man who gradually gained Seema's trust because of his outstanding ability. Major, we have confirmed that there are 8 survivors, 12 wounded, and the rest are the people who can't be contacted for the time being. After a while, Castle transmitted the statistics to Seema Zagu. Looking at the screen in front of her that showed the results of the casualties, Seema could not help but reveal a bitter smile. This was a battle that could not even be considered a Pyrrhic victory, if it were not for the appearance of the strange body that attracted the attention of most of the monsters. The team led by Seema would have been completely annihilated. Therefore, the people who could not be contacted by Castle could basically be determined to have died in the hands of those monsters. In a fierce battle, Seema once saw with her own eyes that the Zagu's body was covered by those small bodies. The small bodies tore open the cockpit, pulled out the pilots inside, and ate them in 4 parts. That bloody scene was still hard for Seema to forget. Send some people to send the wounded back to Msai. By the way, you also go back and check on Msai's losses. Next, I'm afraid we'll have to stay on Msai for a while. Yes, Major. Castle understood Seema's considerations and approved of Seema's arrangement. In fact, the best place to go was to let Msai enter the spaceport of Ifiku Island to rest and resupply. But even if they had the experience of risking their lives to resist these monsters, the people of Ifiku Island would not be kind to Seema and the others. To avoid trouble, in order to prevent her subordinates, who had just escaped death, from being provoked by the people of Ifiku Island, Seema could only make this helpless decision in the end. After all, Seema's John Fleet was the one who wanted to use a soft suppression. Moreover, before preparing for this so-called soft suppression, the personnel sent by the John Fleet had more or less provoked the personnel of Ifiku Island. After thinking for a while, Seema still couldn't come up with a better plan. Who asked them to be in such an awkward situation? At this moment, Seema noticed an unfamiliar mech standing on top of a mountain of corpses not far away. With a flash of inspiration, Seema pressed a button and sent out a light signal to the unfamiliar body according to a certain pattern. Light signal? Even though there was quite a distance between them, and there was some wreckage floating around, which made their field of vision a little narrow. However, the monitoring system of Lancelot, King's sword, was still sensitive enough to capture the moment when the light changed. Seema Calahau. Lancelot, King's sword, quickly deciphered the information hidden in the light signal. But the moment Ray Minkai saw the deciphered information, he couldn't help but be stunned. On second thought, this was inevitable. The colonial satellite of Ifiku Island was there. At this time, there were only a few people who could be related to this colonial satellite. And Seema Calahau was the one who was most deeply involved in the tragedy of Ifiku Island. Even before she died, she was still haunted by the undead of Ifiku Island and had not been freed. I didn't expect to meet Seema Calahau in this way. It's just that Seema Calahau might be able to get rid of the influence of the nightmare of Ifiku Island now, right? Ray Minkai sighed, but he didn't immediately respond to the other party. Instead, he controlled Lancelot, King's sword, to wave his hand at Seema's Zagu, pointed in a certain direction, then spread his light wings and flew all the way. Then you wanted to follow? Seema frowned, but shook her head helplessly. Even if she wanted to and had the courage to follow, her Zagu no longer had the ability to do so. In the fierce battle of life and death just now, Seema, who had used all her skills to fight, couldn't stop her Zagu from being almost paralyzed. Looking at Lancelot, King's sword that gradually became smaller, and finally only a light spot was left, Seema could only make a decision. That was to wait until she met up with Msai, who had rushed over, and see if she should follow the situation. The reason why Ray Minkai didn't directly meet Sema. There was a reason. When this batch of Beta Fleet was just wiped out, White Cat State Zero, who stayed on Ifiku Island to clean up the remaining Beta Fleet, suddenly sent a message. God, there seems to be something strange at this coordinate. The message sent by White Cat State Zero was ambiguous, but Ray Minkai couldn't ignore it. Now that the surrounding Beta Fleet had been wiped out, Ray Minkai sent an invitation signal to Sema, and then he flew toward the coordinates specified by White Cat State Zero. As for whether Sema would follow him or not, Ray Minkai let her be. Compared to this, Ray Minkai was more concerned about what happened at the coordinates that White Cat State Zero called the strange location. In the deep darkness, there were lost lives. At the price of these lost lives, there were the remnants of the fleet that was able to escape from the terrifying and endless sea of monsters. There were ear-piercing alarms in his ears. On the left and right sides were his subordinates, who were either covered in blood or covered in blood. They gritted their teeth and persevered in their posts, operating the battleship that was covered in cuts and bruises and was on the verge of destruction. In front of him was the broken glass that was protected by the protective equipment to prevent it from breaking, causing the cabin to lose pressure and the wreckage hanging on the edge of the porthole. The wreckage of the monster's body that came from nowhere and tried to crash into the battleship, but was blown up by the main cannon in time. General, Altaic sent a message. Valkyrie, continue to move forward. Altaic, stay behind and cover the rear. The CIC officer in charge of contacting the surrounding allies said in a choked voice. Creak. The ear-piercing and unpleasant sound of metal twisting deeply hurt the ears of the people around, but they knew that there was someone who was in more pain than them. Even if that person had the body of a mountain. Even if that person could bring unparalleled confidence to the people around him as long as he stood there. Even if he was regarded as the pillar of the Guion army. But now his figure was so lonely, so tragic. In the past, as long as he used a little bit of strength, he could easily kill a strong adult man. But now, the iron pipe that he had pinched had pierced deeply into his flesh, leaving behind traces of dazzling blood. It hurts. It hurts so much. It hurts so much. Desru really wanted to shout this out, but he couldn't. How many times since he encountered that damn monster? How many times? First, Desru regarded the keel as one of the future seeds of Guion. When the keel faced the sudden attack of that group of monsters, it did not hesitate to block the first wave of monsters and bought enough time for the fleet to respond. Then, the Letvizin directly killed a monster that was larger than Psy at the cost of its own body and detonated its power furnace, opening a way for the fleet to break out. Desru's expression was calm all the way. He was so calm that even he couldn't believe that he could be so calm. One ship, two ships, three ships, until there were many ships, every ship, in order to protect the fleet, and even to protect the Valkyrie that Desru was on from the monsters, did not hesitate to use itself as a shield, opening a way for the fleet and the Valkyrie again and again. Boom! The shockwaves caused by the explosion around the Valkyrie shook the bridge, shook everyone's bodies, and also shook everyone's will to win. There were many monsters. The monsters were very fast. The true appearance of the monsters was unknown. In the absence of knowing anything about the enemy, under the enemy's unparalleled and overwhelming numerical advantage, the atmosphere of despair quietly pressed down on everyone's hearts. At some point, dead silence descended, pressing down on everyone, making it hard for them to breathe. They could only wait silently for that moment to arrive. Everyone, listen to me. At this moment, in this moment of despair, they heard the loud voice that they were used to in the past, but at this moment, it was like the voice of salvation. Even though this loud voice was no longer full of energy, no longer had the surging power of the past, only the trembling of fear of death, only the sadness of the death of their comrades. But at this moment, the voice was so trustworthy that they couldn't help but want to rely on it. Everyone, listen to me. Sparkling tears streaked across his trembling face. His gorilla-like face was distorted and extremely ugly, but he still gritted his teeth and used all his strength to let out his roar. used all his strength to wake up his subordinates who were falling into the abyss of death, used all his strength to burst out a roar that was unwilling to die like this. Everyone, listen to me. The hoarse roar brought out Desru's current mood, his current anger. Everyone, listen to me. The keel for the first wave of attacks from that group of monsters, for the sake of saving US, sank. The Leviathan collided with that huge monster, detonated its own power furnace, and opened the way for us. The Ale Knight not long ago, in order to stop the pursuit of the monsters, the Altair voluntarily brought up the rear. A trace of blood slid down from the corner of Desru's mouth, as if he was struggling in his heart at this moment, unwillingly dripping on the back of his right hand that was holding the railing tightly, staining the white glove red. They, our comrades, our compatriots, why do they do this? Because they want to leave the hope of survival to us. They want us to bring back information about this group of monsters. Bring back John. Let His Royal Highness Prince Rang. Let the commander know about this place. Then, send out a fleet to kill this group of monsters. Desru's voice was so loud that everyone's ears were buzzing. However, a sliver of confidence was gradually growing in their bodies, driving away the fear that was controlling their bodies. We can't die yet. We have to go back alive. This is not for some noble ideals. It's not for some ulterior motive, but for our loved ones, to protect our brothers and sisters from being harmed by these damn monsters. Desru almost felt that he could not breathe, but he was still shouting. He was still roaring. He had to use all his strength to reignite the confidence and courage in the hearts of his subordinates. All fleet, listen to my order. From now on, the Valkyrie will first take up the task of bringing up the rear, then follow the order of battle from top to bottom. Carry out the task of bringing up the rear. This is an order. Carry it out immediately. When the other MSE captains heard Desru's ridiculous order, they subconsciously wanted to dissuade him. But when they saw Desru's ugly face that looked like a devil's crying face, all that was left was a silent military salute. The next moment, Desru's Valkyrie resolutely turned around, left the fleet, and entered the position of bringing up the rear for the fleet. Go, my subordinates, my compatriots. Bring back the news here. Father, brother, now is not the time for human civil war. Chapter 9:36. The Valkyrie, which was covered in wounds and smoke, was moving with its back to the fleet, facing the monsters that were chasing after it. At this moment, the Valkyrie shone brightly in this world, and at the same time, it was also the most tragic moment. That's all there is to it. What should we do? Kai. On the top of the Valkyrie's bridge, a small white figure was lying in a crater on the outer armor of the ship. It stretched lazily and asked Lancelot, King's sword, who was hiding in the surroundings. Get ready. The response from Lancelot, King's sword, surprised it. Are we not going to wait? Just like in those stories, before the person being saved is in a complete crisis of death, we cannot lend a helping hand. Otherwise, the effect will not be so good. Having said that, Desru Zabi does not need us to do this. He is the only man in the Zabi family. Ray Minkai thought of many words, but in the end, he only used the most common one. However, for a complicated family like the Zabi family, it was definitely a compliment. The Zabi family, which came down from Dijin, was nothing except for being on the Langa list. They were all naive and pure noblemen. Only this man with amazing strength and ugly appearance, who was jokingly called a gorilla by others, Desru Zabi, was the only man in the Zabi family. Ray Minkai did not need to play any tricks on him. Moreover, from the moment the White Cat, State Zero, discovered the fleet, Desru Zabi and the others' every move and conversation were all monitored by the White Cat, State Zero. Now, wasn't it the moment when Desru Zabi and the others were facing death? There was no need to wait. In front, the Valkyrie was already exchanging fire with the beta that had caught up. Pay attention to evading. Except for those small monsters close by, all firepower is locked on those big guys. Don't let any of the big guys get past the Valkyrie. In the Valkyrie's bridge, Desru Zabi clenched his fists tightly. His eyes did not move away from the monsters outside the porthole. He had to do everything he could to delay the footsteps of these monsters, until swoosh. Suddenly, a cold, murderous intent descended, deeply stabbing Desrazabi's heart. Retreat. Tend to port. Retreat at full speed. Desru's orders were swift and decisive. However, the explosion and tremors still came from the starboard side of the Valkyrie. In the blink of an eye, the bridge was enveloped by the tremors, and everyone felt dizzy. Grasping the railing tightly, Desru roared, "Continue to evade. Report the damage." "General, the right engine of the Valkyrie has been hit. Now, the Valkyrie's power has dropped by at least 50%. It can no longer accelerate. It can only maintain its current position." CIC's report chilled everyone's hearts. Even with the firepower, armor, and speed of the fleet, the Valkyrie was no match for the strange attacks of those monsters. "Keep your spirits up. As long as the Valkyrie hasn't sunk and we haven't died, covering the retreat of our allies is still our mission." Deslu abruptly bent the railing and roared thunderously. "Yes, General." Since he could not continue to accelerate, he could only maneuver in a small area to deal with these damned monsters. It wasn't over yet. He hadn't lost yet. They could still fight. Desru's gaze was still ferocious. He was still focused on the monsters that were rushing towards him, and was still looking for the monster's weakness. Such a tenacious fighting spirit made the White Cat State Zero, who had witnessed the entire process of the Valkyrie being hit, raise its eyebrows. Good fighting spirit, but objectively speaking, this ship can be said to have been sentenced to death. White Cat State Zero shook its head and sighed. Then, a white light suddenly rose from the White Cat State Zero. Boom! Another explosion set off a shockwave that hit the bridge. "Report the damage," Desra shouted instinctively. "Report! Report!" In the attack, just now, this ship did not suffer any damage. CIC was stunned for a moment. He looked at the warship damage interface that did not continue to worsen in shock. "What? Are you blind? The impact just now was so strong." How did the Valkyrie? Desru's adjutant naturally did not believe CIC's words. In his opinion, it was undoubtedly the same as CIC's nonsense. He quickly stepped forward and looked at CIC's operation interface. As a result, he was also surprised like CIC. What was even more coincidental was that the Valkyrie was hit again at this time. The shockwave from the explosion, the strong tremor, they really felt it. But the monitoring interface in front of them did not change at all. It was as if the explosion and the impact did not happen on the Valkyrie at all. General, please come and take a look." The adjutant hesitated for a moment and finally let Desru make the decision. "No need to look. This ship will not suffer any damage for the time being." Before Desru's burly body walked to the adjutant, an unfamiliar voice sounded in the bridge. Who's there?" Desru was familiar with the appearance, voice, and name of every person on this ship, but only this voice had never appeared on this ship before. "Who I am is not important. What's important is that you better maintain the flying position of this ship. Leave the rest to us," the unfamiliar voice said. Then, as if to gain the trust of Desru and the others, and also to increase the credibility of their own words, a layer of flickering green light film appeared outside the porthole of the bridge and completely enveloped the Valkyrie. Throughout the entire process, Desru and the others could even clearly see the bursts of energy explosions that occurred on the light film. Obviously, the attacks of the monsters were all blocked by this strange light film. Only the shockwave from the explosion was still shaking everyone's body. Energy barrier? Desru paused for a moment, and then he immediately understood the mystery of this strange light film. The next second, the determination on Desru's face faded a bit, and then it was replaced by a burning desire to fight. Although he did not know where the unfamiliar voice came from, as long as he had the help of this strange technology, even if the Valkyrie lost half of its power, it could still defeat those monsters. "Hey, big guy, I advise you not to give orders without thinking. Someone will naturally take care of those BETs. You just need to seize the time to roughly repair this tattered ship. When Desru heard this, he could not help but want to refute, but under the current situation of the Valkyrie, he acquiesced to the unfamiliar voice's statement. The unfamiliar voice was naturally White Cat Zero. However, the current White Cat Zero was not in the cute little white cat form, but the mechanical lion form of a wild lion. Because of this, it was able to use the radiation shield to protect the Valkyrie and prevent it from being attacked by the battleship-level beta monsters. As for the counterattack and annihilation, it was naturally left to Rei Minkai and Lancelot, Kingsword. As a matter of fact, there was a commotion among the beta fleet that was chasing the Valkyrie. A commotion that was getting bigger and more intense. A stream of light unstoppably pierced through the left wing of the beta fleet, heading straight for the core area of the beta fleet, an area surrounded by at least 10 super-large battleship-level beta monsters. This was an area that Desru and the others, who were only focused on escaping, had never been able to reach or discover. However, Rei Minkai, who arrived later, knew that this might be the key to triggering this crisis. LDNOH reactor output increased. Dimensional barrier operating at full power. Rei Minkai took a deep breath and pushed the sidebar. Lancelot, Kingsword, which caused this commotion, turned into a light arrow that was enough to penetrate the beta fleet, knocking the battleship-level beta monsters that were larger than the Psi-class into the road to the underworld. During this period, there were more than 10 weak streams of light that were difficult to detect hovered around Lancelot, Kingsword. That was the armed composite wings that Rei Minkai had released in advance to act as the eyes of Lancelot, Kingsword. The armed composite wings had super high mobility. Even if they were detected by the surrounding beta monsters, they would not be able to capture the ghostly figure. What's more, the existence of Lancelot, Kingsword had attracted the attention of most of the beta monsters. Those rolling eyeballs turned to the location of Lancelot, Kingsword. In just an instant, an extremely dazzling and gorgeous halo erupted around Lancelot, Kingsword. Its magnificence, its brilliance. Even the Valkyrie, whose line of sight was blocked by the dense beta fleet, noticed the situation here. What's going on? Your Excellency, could it be that those monsters are about to attack? The appearance of the radiation shield and the disturbance of the beta fleet made Desru feel a trace of awe towards the unfamiliar voice. Attack? No, it's just a farce. You guys continue to deal with your own matters. The steel wild lion raised its head, glanced at the core area of the disturbance, and lay down again. State Zero naturally knew how shameless the Lancelot, Kingsword that Rei Minkai was piloting was. As long as the output of the LDNOH reactor did not exceed the limit, the enemy would not be able to break through the dimensional barrier and thus threaten Lancelot, Kingsword. Moreover, with only the rotten brains of those bugs, they would not be able to detect the weakness of the dimensional barrier. After all, not everyone was a realm Mount Inowan. Not to mention those rotten bugs. Lancelot, Kingsword, which had run through the beta fleet in a barbaric manner, rushed into the core area of the beta fleet effortlessly. There, more than 10 huge battleship-level beta monsters of the 1,000-meter class had already assumed a posture of guarding a tree stump. As soon as Lancelot, Kingsword appeared, all the light organs on their bodies suddenly burst out with a deadly and bright brilliance, and suddenly bombarded the body of Lancelot, Kingsword. If this attack were to hit the body of Ifixio Island, it would be a terrible attack that would break through the outer wall and directly hit the inner wall ecological zone, directly destroying the ecological zone. The output of the LDNOH reactor is confirmed, operating normally. The dimensional barrier's operating power is stable, at a stable value. In front of him was a white screen, but Rei Minkai was not surprised. Is this your attack? Too weak. With a flap of the light wings, the figure of Lancelot, Kingsword disappeared from the laser attack axis. The next moment, Lancelot, Kingsword appeared again in a condescending manner, overlooking the battleship-level beta monsters that had yet to react. With the sword in hand, the armed compound flying wings gathered here. These battleship-level beta monsters that blocked Lancelot, King's sword were already dead. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.